Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to This or That, a series on my channel where I decide which deck will stay and which deck will go. All right, so if you are new to my channel, welcome. And if you're new to this series, let me give you the rundown. This is a series where I am sort of pitting one deck from my collection against another deck in my collection because for whatever reason, in my weird way of looking at my tarot and oracle decks, these decks I feel like sort of slot into the same space. Now, it's not like I only ever need to have one deck in a particular category, but sometimes I find myself with two filling the same kind of need to the point where I feel like one may end up getting neglected or is getting neglected and the other one is getting all the love. And sometimes when that happens, I feel like it's time to let one of them go. So I have been sharing the pairings on my community tab here on the channel and letting you guys vote on which of the two decks in every pairing are your favorites. So the first pairing we're going to be talking about today is the Fairytale Tarot by Lisa Hunt and the Tarot of the Divine by Yoshi Yoshitani. Now these are both fairy tale themed decks. And so before I dive into my thoughts on these, let me just pop the poll up on the screen so that you can see how everybody voted. I was actually really shocked by these results. I thought most people would definitely prefer Lisa Hunt's deck. After all, Lisa Hunt's deck is a classic. It is probably, I think, one of the first fairy tale tarots we got, at least in the mass market, that I'm aware of. There was the Inner Child cards, which I think may have technically come first, which were fairy tale themed. But this was one of those decks that was sort of a unicorn deck for me for a long time. I really wanted it, but of course, by the time I discovered it, it was out of print. It came out, I believe, when I was just way out of the loop on decks. Yeah, this book that I have here is from the first edition, which was printed in 2009. So that was definitely in a period of time where I was certainly not acquiring decks. I was working with a very minimal collection. Anyway, let me tell a little bit of the story about how I ended up with this combination. So for starters, I ended up with the Fairytale Tarot in general because the Spanish edition of the Fairytale Tarot is actually still available, or it was when I got it. I think one of the things that enchants me about this deck is that a lot of the stories are stories that I recognize. So these are characters from stories I'm more familiar with, which means I can more easily identify what's happening in a lot of these cards. However, with that being said, the Spanish edition is one of my favorite cards in the deck. The Spanish edition, even though I have like a high school couple of years of Spanish and generally understand what it is that I'm looking at, there's something that creates, I think, a little bit of a disconnect for me with this particular edition. As much as I love it, I find myself not reaching for it, and I do have to wonder if, I love this La Bruja for the High Priestess, I do have to wonder, Puss in Boots, if that's why, if I just don't tend to reach for it because it just feels just that teeny bit inaccessible. And that probably sounds really silly because, again, I do know which cards I'm looking at. They are clearly labeled. But anyway, I picked up the Spanish edition of this deck so I could have it. I do love these original backings. But I also recently discovered that this deck is going to be coming back through a Kickstarter that Lisa Hunt and her team are going to be putting out. So I know that this is going to be coming back in an English version, and I think that may end up solving my problem. Now, with it being said that I have the Spanish edition of the deck with the guidebook, I was able to actually trade with a friend for a copy of the English guidebook for the deck. So I do actually have all the stories in English. I really want to spend more time with this deck and get to know it. Now, I do really love the English guidebook. But when I'm thinking about the decks that I reach for when I think fairy tale deck, the Tarot of the Divine, the Tarot of the Divine, why am I having a hard time saying that tonight? The Tarot of the Divine became a fast favorite. Like, I brought this into my collection. No, back up. And this might be part of it too. I was gifted this deck, and it was such a lovely and generous gift. And I was also gifted this big, beautiful book, which is sold separately, which lets you go more into the stories. And each story just is one full page, and I love that. I love this accompanying book so much. I've read the whole thing cover to cover, but whenever I work with this deck, I always keep my bookmark in whatever the last story was that I read, which was Hanuna, the World Turtle, which is an Iroquois mythology. Now, the interesting thing about the Tarot of the Divine for me is that I feel like this deck has just such a wonderful diversity. So I always feel like I learn a little bit of something. But I think more than that, one thing that I think is done very, very well in this deck, and I've talked about it before, is I feel like even if you don't look into the book to know more about the stories that are represented, I definitely feel like the energy of each card is clearly illustrated, so you can read with this deck without knowing the stories. And this is one of the only fairy tale type decks I've encountered where I feel like that is the case, where you could dive deeper into the myth and into the story, but the actual way that the card is illustrated still illustrates the meaning of that card. And I think this is just done really, really well in the Tarot of the Divine. So I was trying to think, okay, if I'm going to keep just one of these two, to me it feels like the obvious choice to keep the Tarot of the Divine, because I'm so bonded to it. I love it. I find it so easy to work with. I've read this. I love this Two of Cups, by the way. But there's more diversity. It's really, really quite beautiful, and I love it so much. But I also really, really, really love Lisa Hunt's artwork. So I think what I'm going to be doing is I think I'm going to let the Spanish edition of this deck go, knowing that an English version is coming back out. I do think I will be backing the English version when it comes out on Kickstarter. I think I'm going to also hold on to my English version of the original guidebook, because I don't really know what the quality of the book is going to be, if there's even going to be a full-size guidebook with the Kickstarter version. So I think I'm going to hold on to this, and I do have the full boxed set in Spanish with the Spanish guidebook, and I think those I'm probably going to let go. But as always, if you're new to me doing any kind of decluttering, I think it's important to note that I don't ever declutter anything straight from my collection. I shouldn't say never, but very rarely do I let something go immediately. I usually just put it away. I have a drawer where I put my decks probably to be rehomed, and it just lives there for a while. And if I don't miss it, if I don't find myself feeling like, oh, where's the such and such deck, I really want to reach for it, if that doesn't happen, then it's okay to let it go. Like, its time is over and I can find a new home for it. And I think this is one that's, I think, just a really easy decision, and frankly is kind of cheating, because I do know the English version is coming back. But there is no way that this gorgeous Fairytale Peggy bag is leaving my possession. This is one of Peggy's first Peggy bags that she ever made me. I love the castle and the unicorn in the scene on this bag. So this is certainly staying. I don't necessarily think it's the right match for this deck, though. So it may be the deck that my new version of the Fairytale Tarot goes into. I know, kind of cheating. But anyway, out of this pairing, definitely keeping Tarot of the Divine. And I will be rehoming, and the book, of course, from the Fairytale Tarot, but I will be rehoming the Spanish version of the deck. The next pairing is the Sirens Melody Tarot versus the Starseeker Tarot. Oh boy. Okay, so this is one that I think is going to be a little bit tricky for me. First, let's have a look at the poll and see what you guys think. So the overwhelming majority, again, about 70%, I feel like we've had some really strong differences with the last pairing and this one. But again, with this pairing, 70% of you prefer the Starseeker Tarot over the Sirens Melody Tarot. So here is confession time. I haven't worked with either of these much. I haven't worked with Sirens Melody really at all. And Starseeker Tarot, I've only worked with a little bit. And that was actually the main reason why I wanted to pull these out for this or that, because I feel like part of the reason that I'm not playing with or working with the Starseeker Tarot much is because there has been so much in my collection that I haven't had a chance to bond with it, but I feel very strong desire to work with it. And I was so enamored with this deck during the Kickstarter campaign and was so excited when it came in. But I think this was a deck that came in at a time when I was just overwhelmed by other things and I've played with it, and I love the artwork. But okay, anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. You guys far prefer the Starseeker, so let's look at that deck first. Okay, so the Starseeker Tarot is by Nikki Ferrata, who I believe is also known as the Van Mystic on Instagram. This artwork, first of all, this deck is edged in just a gorgeous, matte sort of mauve color, I guess. It's definitely a purpley color, and there's a rose petal finish to these cards, but it's not a really sticky rose petal. The cards still pretty much separate and fan nicely. This artwork is so lovely, and I really truly enjoy it. There's one or two cards in here that I feel like there's an interesting perspective on the characters, but in general I find this deck to be really easy to work with and easy to read, and there's a couple cards in here that are just my everything, namely my Nine of Cups in here. I say mine because it's like my number one card I think in any deck, but I love the Nine of Cups in this deck. I love this Two of Pentacles. And when I've pulled this out to do readings for myself or for clients, it's just performed really, really well. I just haven't reached for it as much as I think I would like to. And I also feel like this deck feels a little bit gentle and breezy. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, I feel like there's decks where you just pull them out and you know that the work with the deck is going to go smoothly. I don't know how else to describe that. And that's a very intangible thing to try to describe. But I do really, really, there it is. There's my Nine of Cups. I mean, that is like probably my perfect Nine of Cups. One of my favorites of all time, easily. So love, love, love this deck. I also really like the backing. So pretty. Now, in fairness, the Sirens Melody Tarot was actually sent to me for review. And I do think that sometimes I'm a little more likely to be more critical. This sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I'm a little more likely to be critical of decks that were sent to me for review because, of course, I didn't have to save up my money or like use my budget for those decks. And I don't say that to be ungrateful. It's kind of quite the opposite. I feel very blessed to be able to review decks. It's one of the things I love the most about YouTube. I love the opportunity to do walkthroughs and dive into symbology and learn more in that process. However, I do find that I'm a little bit more careful, especially these days with decks that are sent to me for review, to really consider is as much as I might appreciate the deck for its artwork or for its production quality, and these are the prettiest backs of any tarot deck I've ever touched in my life. These backs give me life. I mean, the seashell in this like almost like mother of pearl kind of circle in the back, the gold foiling. This deck is absolutely gorgeous. And it actually came to me in this beautiful wooden box with this lovely wrap on it. Like it was so beautifully packaged. And this is the version of the deck. There's two versions, or there was at the time that I got this. There was two versions, one with keywords on it and one without. And I got the one without. That was the one that was sent to me. Here's the thing about this deck. I'm going to zoom us in. This also has a really lovely rose petal finish that I'd actually venture to say is the same as the one in the Starseeker Tarot. So the cards still separate and fan beautifully. They don't clump as much as some of the rose petal decks do. The artwork in this deck is so lush. This is one of my favorite Hanged Mans of all time. I love it so much. The artwork is so lush, but there is so much border, and I actually really like the borders. I think they're beautiful, but the border does mean that the artwork is smaller, and in a way, the card itself feels a little more cramped and contained. And I think, oh, that's so pretty. Some of these cards are just absolutely stunning. But then there's a few cards in here that I feel like don't really go with the rest of the deck, almost as if there's a disconnect in some way. And I find myself not excited to reach for this or to really bond with it. Whereas I feel like with the Starseeker Tarot, I really want to put the effort in to spend more time with it. With this deck, it's been hanging on my decks to be worked with rack that I keep by my bedroom door. And I just have not felt at any point like, oh, I really want to go grab the Sirens Melody Tarot. Like, this is the one I really want to reach for, despite the fact that I genuinely appreciate the artwork. But I think if you check out my walkthrough, which I'll try to remember to link in the description box or in the eye or the info or the cards up above, or both, I think you can kind of tell in that walkthrough that there were definitely cards that gave me pause. And again, this artwork is, oh, look at this chariot. It's so pretty. There's a soft kind of intentional, I want to say muddiness, and that's not at all the right word. Maybe flow is a better word. There's a lot of density, I guess, in a way, to the artwork. And I love the way that that looks, but I will admit it's a little hard on my eyes at times to pick out the details. I think that's actually one of the reasons why sometimes I'm drawn to decks with this more like almost vectorized style, really crisp lines. I think one of the reasons that I'm drawn, I'm just going to fuss with the box while I chat with you. I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to this art style sometimes over this art style, as much as I love, and maybe even I think in an objective reality, if I were looking at art on the wall, I'd probably even maybe prefer this art. But when it comes to reading tarot, I don't want to have to think or it's not that I don't want to have to think. There's a full sentence there. I'm just trying to get it out. I don't want to have to think about what I'm seeing. I want what I'm seeing to come to me right away so that I can then begin to dig into what I'm seeing means. And so I feel like in decks like this, even where the artwork can get very dark, as it does here, it's very clear what I'm looking at. My eyes don't have to work for it. And that could literally be a symptom of aging eyes. I do have reading glasses that I wear, although I'll be honest, I don't wear them often when I'm working with tarot. And I think part of me maybe is just rebelling against the fact that I might need to sooner than later. But I mean, that time is coming. But I like the idea that I don't have to work as hard to see with this deck. So I do think that is going to be a major point in favor of the Starseeker, as well as just the sort of hard to define or hard to explain just draw that I have to Starseeker that I feel like I just don't have to Sirens Melody, as beautiful as it is. And it hurts my heart a little bit because you guys know I'm a water baby, and it's really hard for me to think about letting a even remotely watery or ocean themed or mermaid themed deck go, but this one is just, I don't think it's for me. So I think this is the one that I'm going to let go out of this pairing. I'm going to tuck them back into their beautiful little box, and I'm going to put these into their purgatory. So yeah, just like the other one, this is going to go into purgatory. So I'm going to be letting go of the Sirens Melody, and I'm going to be keeping Starseeker. All right, our next pairing is Legend, the Arthurian Tarot versus the Ancestral Path Tarot. So let me pop the poll up on the screen. So in this case, the Ancestral Path Tarot beat out the Legend, the Arthurian Tarot in your guys' opinion. So I'm going to dive into Ancestral Path first, and we're going to talk about this one. Now, here's another situation where I have some sort of piecemeal sort of pieces. I found a copy of the Ancestral Path Tarot guidebook in a local used bookstore, and it took me a long time to get the sort of smoky smell out of this book. And I can't detect the smoky smell anymore. So I think we're good now on that front. Now, the reason I hunted down this book is because this was originally part of a boxed set that came with this really nice, juicy guidebook that gets into the story behind the cards, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. But when the deck was reprinted, it only came with one of these little white books, which does a pretty decent job, actually, in kind of explaining what it is that you're seeing in each of the suits, but it doesn't go into any of the more specific details of the minor arcana, and I don't even remember if it does in the major arcana. It does not. So it doesn't actually talk too much. There's a bit of an overview where you learn a little bit about how this deck works, but let me just share what I mean here. So this deck, I mean, for starters, it's absolutely enormous. Like, I have large hands, and like, here's one of my Cosmic Whispers rune cards, which are just kind of standard size, but obviously really thick. But you can see, like, just how huge these cards are. They're gigantic. And one of the things that's really neat, or that drew me to this deck, is that you have so many different cultures represented, but in particular, through each of the minor arcana, you see a different sort of cultural story being played out. And so through the cup suit, you have this Arthurian legend playing out. Through the wand suit, there is a I think, oh, I forget now, it's King Tut, I think. It's an Egyptian story. I'm so bad at remembering. And I've been told, and I forget again, there's a Japanese story playing out in the sword suit, cups, and then there is a native themed through the pentacles suit, which are called the sacred circles. So that's really cool to me. And then in the major arcana, you have sort of a mix of cultures represented. The artwork in this deck is actually really super beautiful, and I really was drawn to it. I do find the size incredibly unwieldy. It's not a deck that I feel like I could use in client readings, and there are things about this deck that, I don't know, they just don't, like, that is the most beautiful Two of Swords ever of life. It's so pretty. So I don't know. I feel like I was really excited about this deck. I think it's really cool the way that it's set up, and I did work with it for a bit. But I found that I tabled my work with this deck until I could find this guidebook. And then when I got the guidebook and it was kind of, it smelled really smoky, I had to let it sit for a long time. And then by the time it was okay to work with, it felt like I had sort of, the time or the excitement or the bonding opportunity for this deck had passed me by. I just felt like I wasn't as interested in actually really getting to know it in the way that I feel like I would need to get the best benefit out of the deck. Again, it's really, really beautiful, but I don't know. There's just something about it that feels, maybe it's the fact that it feels actually a little bit disjointed, but I will tell you that one of the things I was most excited about in this deck was the Arthurian legends being told through the cup suit. And that is why I chose to pit this deck up against the Legend of the Arthurian Tarot that I have here. Now, this deck is kind of sort of, it's one of those decks that I just can't seem to let go of. So I don't know if today's going to be any different. I have beef with this deck. So let me explain. So Legend of the Arthurian Tarot, I actually found this in a secondhand store in my neighborhood for about 20 bucks. I had no idea it was out of print at the time. I even did my trick I used to do with a lot of my tarot guidebooks. You may have seen this on my channel before, where I color the edges of the pages of the Major Arcana purple, the edges of the Wands pages red, the Swords pages yellow, the Cups pages blue, and the Pentacles pages green, so that I can easily flip to whatever section I'm in. I did that with this guidebook. It even came with one of those old-fashioned like fold-out like reading mats. I love the backings of these cards with their labyrinths. And I even edged this deck in a very lavender, like light lavender. So that's just like an extra card. And this deck is actually back in order because I was very close to rehoming it at one point. My biggest beef with this deck, and the artwork is by Anna Marie Ferguson, as is the guidebook, but my biggest beef was just how pale the characters are. Like, it's not that they're all white people. I mean, they're definitely all white people. It's talking about the Arthurian legends, and I get that, but like, it's not just that, it's that they're literally ghostly pale. And I don't know if it's that the artwork is always this washed out looking or desaturated or whatever the correct word is for it. I don't know if that's intentional. Like, this person has like a more normal coloration to them, right? But a lot of the cards, they're just almost like ghosts. And actually, you know what? As I say that, I also just kind of, something just kind of clicked for me that had never occurred to me before. I just had this like moment of remembering the whole thing in a scene in The Last Unicorn where there's an apparition being made of Robin Hood and his merry band. And there, of course, they were ghosts. In a way, they were visions. And I kind of just wonder if it was almost semi-intentional to have them be ghost-like as a reference to the fact that these characters are from the past. They don't exist in the present. And I think just having that click literally just now, as it occurred to me, like right now, that could be sort of intentional. It might actually be the thing that gets me over the hump with the way that they all look so pale and ghostly. That's really interesting to me. Anyways, okay, so this deck completely focuses on the Arthurian legends, and there even is on the Minor Arcana, there's always like a card, like a little inset showing how many, like, so this is the 7 of Spears, or the 7 of Wands, I think it is. And so there's a little inset that literally has the 7 spears on it, so that I think that's so that you don't have to focus on trying to find them in the actual artwork, which is probably pretty clever. Because I know some people can get really thrown if it's like the 8 of Cups, but they don't see 8 cups somewhere on the card. But what's really great about this is the entire deck is focused on the Arthurian legends. And so the guidebook in this deck is just really incredible. It goes into like every single card. Like, it's actually really great. So, for example, here we have, I'm going to zoom this out just a little bit. So here in the moon, it says ruled by Pisces, and the card's title is Morgan Le Fay. And then it has meaning, reversed meaning, and then it has quite a bit on the description and the symbolism. So it talks about Morgan, and it even has like this whole 2-page spread on Morgan Le Fay specifically. And then when you get into the Minor Arcana, you have a very similar setup, even though it's the minors. A lot of times there's not as much attention given to them. But here we have the 2 of Swords. It says the Knight of 2 Swords is literally the association from Arthurian legend. Again, meaning reversal. And then it describes a scene happening that's related to the Arthurian legends. So I just feel like there's so much beautiful story, and I think this would be a really, really exciting deck to study for a period of time, maybe for a month, maybe for a few months, and really just get to know it on a deeper level. I feel like I would be more interested in doing that because it's very cohesive and the whole thing focuses on the Arthurian legend. So I think I very thoroughly talked myself into keeping this deck for sure. And the fact that it's still in order is kind of nice. Maybe what I need to do is read this book and then spend a month with the deck and do a bit of a month with it and see how I feel at the end of that period. And I think I could see myself really bonding with this. The Arthurian legends are really close to me. I just feel like I'm really bonded to that storyline, and I feel like there's more time to be spent here in this deck. So I'm going to be keeping the Arthurian Legends deck. I'm trying to think, am I ready to let go of the Ancestral Path Tarot? In this guidebook, you can't get anymore. So being able to keep it with this like special guidebook, I think that could be really nice to be able to sort of rehome it as a set. What do I think? I think I am ready to let it go. I think just between the size and the fact that I just haven't felt called to pull it out and actually play with it, I think I might be ready to let this one go. It did originally come in a tuck box, so I'm going to fish the tuck box out, and it is going to go into the sort of purgatory drawer and will be looked at again when I'm for sure that it can go. I didn't even think to like check back in and see if I'm making the same decisions that like you guys kind of made. So in the Fairytale Tarot versus Tarot of the Divine, we agreed, yes. In Sirens Melody versus Star Seeker, we agreed. Ancestral Path versus Legend the Arthurian. Ancestral Path was actually the winner, and that's the one I'm going to be letting go. Legend the Arthurian Tarot is the one I'm going to be keeping. That's really interesting. Also interesting on Legend the Arthurian, there was a collab video I did quite some time ago with Jess Stellar Rain Dancer. I'll try to remember to link that in the description box. And I called this one of my dust collecting decks, and I totally roasted it in that video. And I have still, that was a long time ago, and I've still not been able to let it go. So clearly we are meant to do more work together. So it is staying, it is staying. All right, anyways. Let's move on to our next pairing. So the next pairing is the Angel Tarot by Radleigh Valentine, originally Doreen Virtue and Radleigh Valentine, and the Psychic Tarot, who I have no idea who it's by. Who's it by? This one is by John Holland. All right, so let me pop up the poll, and then I'm going to dive into my thoughts. Okay, I think this is officially the closest poll we've had this episode. So the Psychic Tarot beat out the Angel Tarot 57% to 43%. So I wonder if that's going to change what I'm thinking right now. Okay, let's just see. So let's see. Okay, let me back up. I'm a little bit hyper. It's late. It's been raining. It feels great in my room right now. I'm like in a really good mood. Okay, so this deck was actually gifted to me by Danny, Miss Danny Mystic. She sent it my way because I expressed some curiosity about it, and she was ready to rehome it. Wasn't quite sure what to do with it because it's always hard to rehome a mass market deck because oftentimes it's just not, it doesn't make a lot of sense oftentimes to ship these. But she sent it to me, which I'm so thankful that she gave me a chance to check this out, as well as the Psychic Tarot for the Heart, which has already since left my collection. Now, here's the really interesting thing. I filmed a full walkthrough of the Psychic Tarot that I still haven't published because I really haven't spent any time with this deck since then. Oftentimes, I'll release the walkthrough when I'm about ready to dive into it, or if I'm like just in the mood to release a bunch of extra walkthroughs. But sometimes when I bring a new deck in, I will film the walkthrough, and I just don't publish it right away. So sometimes I'll sit on it like until it feels right to like release it to the world. You know what I mean? And that's because I do walkthroughs not only for YouTube, but I do them for me. So when I get a new deck, it's just part of my bonding ritual. Speaking of which, if you guys are interested in seeing that walkthrough, let me know down below and I will definitely release it no matter what I decide here today. But here's the thing about the Psychic Tarot. It's technically an Oracle deck, so it's the Psychic Tarot Oracle deck because it does not have all 78 cards. It has the Major Arcana. I think the majors are complete. Are there 21? Yeah, there's a complete Major Arcana, and then you have Pentacles, Cups, Wands, and Swords, so it sounds like a tarot, but there's no court cards. One of the things that I do think is really, really freaking fantastic about this deck is the keywords combined with the artwork. It does have a bit of a dated feel. Let's zoom in. I think the artwork does have a bit of a dated feel, but if you are wanting a deck that you can literally pull out of its box and just do readings with without having to know anything about tarot or oracle or whatever, just being brand new to the practice, decks like this are so great. Because of course, if you pull a card that says discontent and boredom, and this is obviously the Four of Cups, I know that because of the keywords more than I do the green border. This is something else that kind of bugs me about this deck though, or something that kind of bugs me, is that Pentacles, you can see Danny even color-coded these really, I guess she didn't. I thought they were color-coded. Oh yeah, it does. She says Pentacles are red, physical earth. Oops. And she says here Cups are green, emotions water. So she actually added these like little flags to the book, which I think is so clever. But anyways, I know that discontent and boredom is the Four of Cups, but if you don't know what Four of Cups is, discontent and boredom is much more useful to you on a card than the Four of Cups. And so for that reason, it's really great. I also love that there are chakra cards in here because as somebody who really enjoys working with the chakras, I feel like that just gives me something to work with as a reader. I feel like this deck is really useful for snappy readings. And in fact, oh, my chakras are kind of clumped together. In fact, I feel like this would be an excellent deck for as like a powerhouse deck. If you were doing a whole lot of client readings, you just wanted something to just throw cards, give effective readings, I feel like this deck would be really good at that. The thing is that I've been working with tarot long enough now that I feel like I tend to reach for decks that I enjoy the artwork more, simply because I don't need the keywords the way that I feel like I might once have, which is not to say that the only benefit in this deck is the keywords. That's not what I'm saying. But because the artwork isn't necessarily something that pulls me in so much, the keywords are one of the biggest benefits for me personally in the deck. So yeah, it'd be snappy. It would be really great for just pulling out and doing some quick readings, but I just don't see myself using it. And since I got it in, this has also hung on my to be worked with rack, and I still have not taken the time to really just spend with it to get to know it. And I think I've just realized that this deck is just not one I'm ever going to reach for before I reach for something I like just a little bit more. And that's sort of the litmus test for me on what's going to stay in my collection, is like, am I going to reach for this over something else? And if the answer to that is always no, then there's really no point to me in keeping it, because it's just going to languish. And I just don't like having decks that languish. So I think this one is going to go, regardless of what I think of the Angel Tarot. This one, I think I just don't think it's meant for me. So I'm going to set this one into the to be rehomed pile before I even dive into Angel Tarot. So, you know, spoilers. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have stories about the Angel Tarot. Oh my goodness. So this deck came into my life partly because I was so enamored with the Guardian Angel Tarot, which was also a Doreen Virtue deck, but currently, or at the time that I got it, not currently, I think it's out of print, but it was sold, republished, I guess you could say, with just Radley Valentine's name on it. And so I picked up one of those copies of the Guardian Angel Tarot, and it grew on me so quickly. I love it. That is one of my favorite decks for just self-care and feeling nurtured. It's like one of my favorite hug decks. Anyway, I saw somebody, I want to say it was Don Michelle. It might have been Don Michelle Boho Tarot, doing a walkthrough of the Angel Tarot. I'm trying to remember if it was her or not. I think it was. But anyway, and I was so excited about the way this deck was structured, and it feels very not angel-y. Like the major arcana, you can see here, the major arcana are angels. So let me zoom in, actually. It's probably going to be easier. The major arcana are angels. So here for the strength card, we have Archangel Ariel. And there's a message here. And I find decks that do this to be very soothing, because similar to the Psychic Tarot, you don't really have to work for the message. It's right there for you. But I really love the artwork in this deck. It's so fantasy art and beautiful. While it is constrained to a smaller space, I think it's pretty clear to me what's happening in the cards, which I really enjoy. And what I especially love is that it's got all of my favorite things. So the fire suit is actually, and it's called fire. The fire suit is all like dragons and dragon-like beings. I have something to say about the court cards too. The earthly suit is all fae or fairies. The water suit, or the air suit, is all unicorns. I mean, need I even say more? And the cup suit is all mermaids. And I was like, okay, well, you're clearly one of my favorite things ever. And another thing I really love about this deck, and one of the things that I think makes it a really excellent deck for beginners to tarot as well, is that the court cards have personality traits printed right on the card. So in addition to the message at the bottom, like what this card could mean in a divinatory way, here we have our page of fire, and it says, news of an exciting new endeavor, use your originality and ingenuity. But it also says outgoing, creative, confident, mischievous, which is a great way to describe the page of wands or the page of fire. Let me find another court card. Yeah, here's the Queen of Earth. And so here it says, make time for those around you, take a sensible approach, deal with challenges in a kind and understanding manner. But it also says thoughtful, creative, warm, and sensible. I just think it's a very well designed deck, and I really enjoy the inclusion of the archangels. It doesn't feel overly new agey or angel-y, even though I'm sure to some it probably would. But for me, it's just pretty. It's pretty, and I've got mermaids and fairies and dragons, and I've got mermaids, fairies, dragons. Who am I forgetting? And unicorns. Oh my gosh, somebody's going to be yelling at the screen and yelling at me right now. I literally forgot the suit of unicorns. What is wrong with me? I love the color-coded borders. I think they really make sense. You have this really pretty light blue color for the water suit. You have the deep sort of purple for the majors. You have a burgundy for the wand suit, green for pentacles, and why am I struggling to find air? Is it also blue? Is that why? Hello? Oh. Okay, well in this lighting it's kind of hard to tell, but actually swords are blue and the major arcana is purple, but the tones are very similar, particularly in the lighting that I have here right now. So actually they look very similar, but it's blue for swords. It's like this turquoisey color for water, for cups. It's this kind of indigo purpley color for majors. I'm babbling. But anyways, I like it. I like it. I like this deck. Is it one that I'm going to use for clients? Probably not. Is it one that I'm going to use for me when I feel like just being in this kind of fantasy world? Absolutely. And also, there was some really cool synchronicities with this deck. Shortly after I did my walkthrough, I had multiple people reach out to gift me this big book of Angel Tarot, which is a big book sold separately that talks all about this deck. And I was like, no, it's okay. And I turned several people down who were just trying to be nice. And then I think like the third or fourth person, I was like, you know what? Somebody really wants me, like the universe clearly wants me to have this book. So I'm going to say yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I was so grateful to receive it. And I have worked with this big book and really enjoyed it. So, I don't think it's strictly necessary to work with the deck. I feel like you get very similar information in the smaller guidebook that comes with the cards, but I have really, really enjoyed diving into this bigger book, and it does go into angel numbers and symbolism, which I really find to be really super interesting. And there's also a bunch in here about astrology and the archangel and dream work, and it does go a lot deeper, and it's a lot of fun to have this bigger guidebook. Anyways, I feel like I'm like really going on and on about every single deck, so I'm going to stop. But anyways, that is the Angel Tarot. It is definitely staying in my collection. Okay, the next pairing is probably going to get me in trouble with at least somebody in the comments. I'm quite sure. But our next pairing is the Ethereal Visions Tarot by Matt Hughes versus the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot by Usi. I'm going to pop the poll up on the screen. This was closer than I expected that it would be, but you guys definitely preferred the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot, so I'm going to talk about that one first. Now, this is a stunning deck. It is a piece of art, and it's something that I genuinely appreciate having. I don't think I'm going to be able to let this go. But I have considered it a couple of times, and I think it's mostly because this feels like a very serious deck, a very weighty deck in a way, but there is so many things about this deck that feel divine to work with. It is a pip deck, but it's a pip deck that is Rider-Waite-Smith based. So here we have the Six of Wands, but we see the positioning in the wands just as we would in the Rider-Waite-Smith Six of Wands. So you're reminded of the pip meaning, or of the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning, even though you're only looking at pips and no people. I do have the separate guidebook for this deck, which I think really shifted my perception, and I just think it's really special that this deck invites you to be the person in the card. I think there's a couple of decks since then that have done similar things, but this one was the first one I was aware of that did that really put you into the perspective of the artwork, so you could imagine yourself in the boat. There's no other figures here to really distract you. But in the major arcana, there is, of course, figures, as well as in the court cards. I think one of the things that throws me with this deck is it's called the Pagan Otherworlds deck. And I think I need to just separate my feelings about this deck from the name of it, because it doesn't feel that pagan to me. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it feels, I guess it feels a little bit medieval, but it doesn't feel specifically pagan. Whereas decks like the Druidcraft Tarot or I mean, I don't know, there's other decks I feel like in my collection that feel more specifically pagan-y. This one feels less like, it feels rural, for lack of a better way to express it. And some of the cards like this one do have sort of a pagan feel to them, I suppose. But the artwork on this deck is exquisite. It's so full of depth and richness. I don't know if I could, and this is one of those decks that I feel like I've collected. And I say that because I just so rarely read with it. And it's not because it's a bad reader. It's just that I so rarely, like, these are the two cards here. Neither of these cards, these are the cards where I feel like we could have really seen some pagan elements. And instead, I feel like we're back to Adam and Eve here and kind of a Pope sort of figure over here. And I feel like it was a missed opportunity with the name of the deck. And I think that's one of the things that just bugs me. But if I take the name of the deck aside, this is a stunning lover's card. And I think it's absolutely breathtaking. So is it just that I feel there's this disconnect or this whatever between the name and the actual artwork of the deck? Probably. But I freaking love this deck. I think it's gorgeous. It feels, I I want to say like pre-Raphaelite. I don't even know what that means. I just know that once I saw a deck called the Pre-Raphaelite Tarot, and it kind of reminded me of the Pagan Otherworlds. But I know nothing about art, y'all, so don't take my word for it. But I mean, look at this. It feels like something I would see in a museum. And I think that's one of the things that makes me feel not bad about keeping it, despite the fact that I don't use it all that much. But that being said, I do reference it regularly, and it is one of the first decks I think of when people are looking for, when they want to get into pip decks, but they want to really stay with the Rider-Waite-Smith. I feel like this is such an excellent one to help you move away from focusing on the people in the cards and instead really thinking about how you see the numerological meaning. So I don't know. It's got a lot of value. One of my first very favorite ever Peggy bag and deck pairings, by the way, and these are among the most beautiful backs I've ever had on a deck or seen on a deck. And the cardstock is like such a gorgeous linen finish. It's just beautiful. I do think this is a deck that's going to stay, and I think it's going to continue to be a deck I don't use very often. But I think I'm going to be okay with that for now. So the Pagan of the Worlds is probably going to stay. I think it's going to stay. I keep making the decision before I view the second deck, but well, that's how it is. So I guess I agree with you guys. But let's take a look at Ethereal Visions, because I don't know what I'm going to do about this one. Now, the reason I put these in the same category, and I don't know if I addressed this with my last pairing, but with the Pagan of the Worlds and the Ethereal Visions, these both have that very artistic, I could see this art in a museum. I appreciate and love the artwork, but I don't use the decks very, very often, as much as I love them both. That's why I put these in the same category. With my last pairing of the Angel Tarot and the Psychic Tarot, it's because in both cases they felt a little bit outdated, and in their own way are kind of like in that same space of like, am I going to reach for this like for a client? No. So if I forget to explain my logic of why I paired them, feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those questions. But anyway, Ethereal Visions. So the reason, I guess what brought to mind the fact that I was considering maybe being willing to let this deck go was when Matt Hughes released his newest Kickstarter for a beautiful redo, like second edition of this deck, which he's done some really wonderful things with, including updating the artwork to include some more diversity, which I think was a really great move and something that, you know, I think I really appreciated. And I was like, well, of course I'll get it. And then I was like, wait, am I using the one I have? Because this is the thing. And it wasn't only the lack of diversity. I think it's just a deck that feels very grown up. And if you guys know anything about my aesthetic, as much as I really love the bling on these cards, like I love the foil detailing, and I think this has got a really soft, romantic feel. And I love the pastel colors, and the artwork is exquisite. And I did actually use this quite a few times for love and relationship style readings for clients. And I think it does really good at that. And I talked about that. We actually did, Danny, Dustin, and I, and 3 Fat Readers, our collab channel, we actually did a 3 Fat Readers approved on this deck. And I just gushed about it because it is really stunning. And it really grew on me. But I had the Oracle deck by the same creator. In fact, I think I technically still have it. It's been in my purgatory drawer for a while now, because I just never felt called to work with the Oracle deck. And I realized that ever since I initially had sort of my honeymoon phase with this deck, I haven't pulled it out since. And I think that's something else that I try to be aware of, is sometimes when I have a new deck to my collection, I go through this period where it's just, I think it's everything. I think it's the bee's knees. But then over time, I eventually realized that it came into my life to show me a new way of looking at the tarot. And then once that period was over, I was kind of over it. And that's happened to me a number of times with decks, certainly not all the time. But I think this was one of those decks that I so enjoyed the different art style, partly because it was so different than everything else in my collection, that it was like a breath of fresh air, sort of blowing out the dust from my way of looking at the cards. And then when that period was over, I was just kind of done with it. Such a beautiful lover's card, though. I absolutely love it. And I do think this art is really, really pretty. But I just don't find myself reaching for it, like, at all. And I don't think I'm going to miss it. So I am going to put it in purgatory and we'll see. I have not, like I said, since that honeymoon period, I have not once felt like, oh, let me go grab the Ethereal Visions. Even though I think it's just absolutely gorgeous and I love the backings. And it's US Games. So the cardstock is, of course, wonderful. So yeah, I think this one can go into probably being rehomed territory. But it is so, so pretty. Okay, so that wraps it up. Let's quickly recap what's staying and what is going. So I am keeping the Pagan Otherworlds, the Star Tarot, the Angel Tarot, Legend, oh, let's zoom us out. I am zoomed out. Legend of the Arthurian Tarot, and Tarot of the Divine. And in a little bit of a cheat, I am also keeping the English guidebook of the Fairytale Tarot, but I am going to let the Spanish deck go. So that is what I'm keeping. I'm letting go of the Psychic Tarot, the Ancestral Path Tarot, the Ethereal Visions Tarot, the Spanish edition of the Fairytale Tarot, and the Sirens Melody Tarot. So that is what is going to be leaving my collection probably after a short stint in purgatory. So we will see where all that ends up. Keep in mind that I can change my mind on any of these. If I find myself missing them, I will pull them out of that drawer and I will put them back in circulation in my collection, and that will be that. But for now, this is where we've ended up. Thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to hear your feedback and comments down below. Would you have made similar decisions? Are you gutted? Are there things that you would have kept that I let go of, or things that you wish I would have kept, or things you think I should take another look at? Let me know down below. I'm always eager to hear your guys' thoughts, and y'all have changed my mind on a few things before, especially in anti-hauls. You guys are brutal in anti-hauls. I've been talked into many an anti-haul deck from you guys. So I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback down below. Please do remember to click like if you enjoyed this video or you found value in it. Subscribe if you're new here, and don't forget to click the little notification bell so you're notified of all my future videos and live streams. Thank you again so much, and may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye, guys.